All right. Welcome to episode 2 of the podcast, Marshall County Memoirs. My name is Tanner Skim. I'm the archivist at the Moundsville Marshall County Public Library.
And I'm Trent Dayton. I'm the Wheeling Service Corps member with the Marshall County Historical Society.
Today we're going to be interviewing Tina Connor, former tour guide at the West Virginia Penitentiary, who's also a volunteer at the Marshall County History Museum. So welcome, Tina.
Thanks for having me, you guys.
So now we're going to begin discussing the West Virginia Penitentiary. Just tell us some of the history.
All right, well, we'll start at the beginning, as any good story should. So in 1863 is when West Virginia becomes its own state during the Civil War that ends in 1865. During this time, there is no real location to hold maximum security inmates. At the time, they're holding them in county jails. Found out the hard way, that just simply doesn't work. So in 1866, that starts the construction for the West Virginia Penitentiary. It was serving during its time as West Virginia's first and only maximum security penitentiary. Now, the northern side was started with construction in 1866. It eventually is ended in about 1899. What's interesting about the initial north side of the building is that it was built by the inmates that it housed. Now, the south side was later done by professional construction crews between 1929 and 1959. The prison itself was operational for a total of 129 years, shut down on March 27th of 1995. This was because the West Virginia Supreme Court ruled the prison a violation of the Eighth Amendment. It was considered cruel and unusual punishment. There were many reasons for this very fair judgment. Among some would have been inadequate airflow, lack of heat or air conditioning. The plumbing and sewage was constantly backing up, which, as you can imagine, would spread disease like wildfire. Lack of lighting, vermin infestations. Overpopulation was a huge issue, housing at times 3 inmates per cell, which only housed 2 bunks. But most importantly, the one factor that truly got that place shut down was for its extremely violent reputation. In fact, still to this day, it sits on the Department of Justice. Most violent prisons across the United States lands about number 3. It was also given by the Department of Justice the nickname Blood Alley. It did see a total of 36 homicides after the 1920s. That's usually when the records are kept a little bit better. Before the 1920s, it's really hard to say. Now, as well, it was known for housing state-sanctioned executions. That's where a lot of its reputation comes from. In total, it housed 94 state-sanctioned executions. The first 85 were done by hanging. The last 9 were done in the electric chair. That was lovingly referred to as Old Sparky. Now, that chair itself was actually built by an inmate, Paul Glenn. He was previously a carpenter prior to his incarceration. I do like to point out that Mr. Glenn did not meet his fate in the chair he built, although we can't say the same for the Ohio prison system. Now, still to this day, the prison is more of a tourist attraction. It is still shut down. They do daytime history tours. They do nighttime paranormal investigations. They've got an escape room, an event center, so still very lively. First and foremost, it is still owned by the state and the Department of Corrections, so they do use it as a training facility, yearly hosting a mock riot. They've got some film crews in there recently. But, yeah, it's definitely one good story to tell. So one of the most popular subjects that people ask about pretty frequently is definitely the riots that took place, 2 of which are major and stand out to me. Now, the one that we talk about most frequently during the prison tours would be titled the New Year's Riot. This took place on January 1st of 1986. It is listed as the penitentiary's last and most violent riot.
So before we go any further, can you
yeah.
just explain to people exactly what a riot is? I mean, is it just a bunch of inmates gathering, and what do they do exactly?
Now, I will say that it could be a case of a lot of people with bad attitudes just deciding to overpower the staff. It could be a last-minute decision. It could be that they found a broken lock on a door and took advantage of it. But at least with a couple of these examples, you'll start to notice that these were very much premeditated. These guys were highly intelligent. Though they may have put their intelligence in the wrong place, they definitely were pretty smart guys. These were definitely orchestrated actions before the riots took place. New Year's riot is a great example. They picked specifically New Year's Day, knowing that a lot of those officers would call off. They were all partying the night before, staying up till midnight. They were probably consuming alcohol, and a lot of them would be calling off in the morning. As well, for at least a week ahead of time, these inmates took their bodily fluids to spray and throw at the officers, getting a lot of them sick, taking that sickness home to their family, spreading it through the household. So New Year's riot, for instance, they only had about 1/3 of their staff that they normally should have housed. So these inmates knew that it was going to be highly understaffed, and that's how they knew they could overpower these guys. So that started at about 10:30 in the morning. Officer Pat Glasscock actually made the distress call. In total, that riot lasted 52 hours, which is marked as West Virginia's longest riot. They took 16 hostages, and during that time, 3 inmates did unfortunately lose their life due to being stabbed. Now, there was one inmate who stepped forward to act as the lead negotiator. His name was Danny Lehman. He was the leader of the Avengers Motorcycle Club. Now, through the 70s into the mid-80s, the Avengers were described as the most powerful club or gang that pretty much took control of that facility, inmates and officers alike. So Danny Lehman, he steps forward and he speaks with Governor at the time, Arch Moore. Now they sit down, they go over a list of negotiations that the inmates had come up with. Now a lot of those negotiations were simply unreachable. So, they only could settle on one. One negotiation was met. It was the construction of a new cafeteria. Now, the inmates were demanding the cafeteria to have heat and air conditioning, not only, but proper heat and air conditioning. And in its history, that was just about the only room that ever had it. Now, that was granted as well. They wanted sanitary conditions. That was one of the biggest gripes that they really had there. A lot of these people were getting sick from the kitchen areas, and the lack of adequate health care wasn't helping that situation. Now, in total, that new cafeteria cost the state about $3 million. And it took just about a year to complete the construction and to be able to start being used. Now, in that meantime, Danny Lehman, who had served as that inmate lead negotiator, because of his actions in the riot, he was moved to the segregation unit. He is now listed as a gang leader, and he is too influential over the mass of inmates. So he gets moved into North Hall, the segregation unit that holds inmates for 23 and a half hours per day. In that time frame, by November of the very same year, Danny Lehman was murdered by a rival gang. So the one individual who had stepped up to do all the work for that cafeteria never got to enjoy a single meal inside.
What an interesting story to hear. I mean, moving to West Virginia from Illinois, I don't know much about the penitentiary, except I know that it's haunted.
Very.
A shock for everybody.
Shock. Was that an electric chair joke?
But that's all I didn't even notice I made that pun. But so this is all new information for me, and I believe it's going to be information for people who don't know much about the penitentiary, except for, of course, being haunted. I think it's top 3 in
it also does. It makes the top 10 list for the most haunted locations nationwide. It usually lands about number 7.
That is something new to me. Tell us a little bit about your experience guiding others. Tell us who usually visits the penitentiary, what areas do you usually take them to, and just tell us some interesting characters that you've met.
Now, I started at the prison in about 2020,
I think so.
and I do have to say that I had probably 2 of the best teachers that I could have ever been blessed to have. So the history tour was taught to me under Officer Charles Gent, better known as Chuck. We all love him. We all know him. And he was an officer that was hired after that 1986 riot. They reinforced the prison with 40 new officers. So he had not only the history of the place, but really the behind-the-scene details, what it was truly like for an officer. He gave me a new perspective on the place because we talk a lot about how the inmates were treated cruel and unusual. We talk about the sewage flooding the cells. Well, guess who's walking just outside the cells? The officers. We talk about the violence between the inmates, but guess who else got that violence? The officers. So it definitely gives both sides of the story. I hate to say it this way, but the caged animals as well as the zookeepers. So that was definitely very eye-opening. And as well, for my paranormal tours, I studied under Jason McKinney. Now, he's a member of the investigative team Paranormal Quest, and he's been into the paranormal for so long. As well, he's just an encyclopedia of history information, so he's a great resource to tie in what happened historically and why that is relevant into the paranormal. Now, I started giving history tours first, and you're going to see a lot of families on vacation. You're going to see a lot of school groups that are taking field trips to learn about it. Get, of course, a lot of paranormal investigators that want to do their homework before they stay overnight. And genuinely, it's just such a really fun job. You get to meet people from all over the place. It is considered a bucket list destination. So we get tons of people all the time that say, I've saved up for years just to be able to come and take this tour. And it's a great feeling to be able to take those people and just kind of let their dreams play out. Now, a lot of things are involved as well. We always tell people to take a lot of pictures, take videos and stuff like that. And of course, you always got to see if you can spot something in your picture in the background. That's always a fun time. I think one of the best times that you'll have there is with some of the school kids. They have the best questions ever. So definitely different from the adult groups, but a lot more fun, I'd say. We, on the historical day tours, go into a lot of the rooms that you would expect and want to see, like the cafeteria, the cell blocks. You can get your picture taken while we lock you up inside of a cell. The paranormal tours, we reserve more interesting areas, such as the psych ward or indoor recreation in the basement. But overall, you're going to get to see about 75% of the property.
Can you give us an example of one of the children's questions? Some of the children's questions. I'm just interested in hearing what they have in mind when they go through those doors.
Kids are so creative, and it really does still keep me on my toes, the thought processes they go through while I'm telling a story. So for the adults, I'm used to kind of the same set of questions. But the kids, they really truly think outside the box. So, for instance, there's a set of recreation yards that is completely infenced for the majority of those particularly violent inmates that you can't trust to just freely walk through the recreation yards. So we do refer to those as bullpens. They are surrounded by razor wire, so those men can't escape. Now, it was the same location previously as the electric chair. So oftentimes we will kind of tell both sides of that story, the electric chair moving into now they are recreation yards. So a little boy, he was probably about 7 years old, and he said, "Can I ask you a question?" I said, "Absolutely." And he said, "What happens if an inmate is leaning up against the metal fence and lightning strikes?" And I genuinely didn't have an answer because I had just never thought about it. But I did just introduce the electric chair, so kind of makes sense why his theory went there. I genuinely had to contact previous officers just to ask them what would happen. They said in West Virginia that had just so happened to never occur, but there was a location in Tennessee that more recently there were 3 inmates that were injured by leaning on the metal fences while lightning struck in the yard. So it actually ended up that a 7-year-old taught me something that I didn't know.
That's just interesting to hear that just question from a kid just sparks up. Oh, I gotta do some more research. And another pun is right there. Okay, wonderful.
That's always been the theme of my tours, are really bad puns. So it's all welcome.
You mentioned Paul Glenn building the electric chair. People who are listening may not know, but we actually have some Paul Glenn furniture in the Marshall County History Museum. Are there other things in the History Museum that you personally love?
I'm so glad you asked. Now, of course, I am pretty partial to the penitentiary's display here at the Marshall County History Museum. And I will say there genuinely is some really interesting artifacts that we keep here. We have tons of pictures, and, a lot of people, you can Google it, you can look at a lot of customer taken photos, but these are old documented photos. They've got officers on the front porch, they've got their badges. You can see more so what the building looked like when it was actually operational, when it was a huge part of the city and the city's history. Now, as well, we have a few of items that you would expect. We have a couple officers' hats and badges, sets of handcuffs, a couple billy clubs here and there. One of the most interesting pieces that I found more recently, we've brought in a piece of the original barbed wire from the front north face of the prison itself. We've also got a couple of postcards from that location, some of which are very nice photographer taken pictures, some of which are older drawings from just somebody who was sitting up on the mound across the street and just put their artistry into that postcard. So I always love seeing what an outside neighbor thought of the prison and what they saw. Of course, it's a beautiful building itself, so genuinely I just like to see pictures of it, but it really was interesting to see how much it was just an everyday part of the community, and some of these items really show that. Of course, we also feature some of the escape information. That's interesting pieces of knowledge that most people want to know. The penitentiary had quite a few escapes. In fact, during its 129 years of prison operations, there were only 2 years that an escape was not recorded, both under the terms of Warden Don Bordenkircher. I'm sure many people around here know that name. Definitely kept that place reformed. One of our most famous escapes is the infamous greenhouse escape in 1992. 3 men dug a very complex tunnel underneath the wall to escape. All 3 of those men were recovered, but we have all the news articles and everything displayed because people love to learn about that one as well.
I mean, it's always fascinating to see people try to escape and just, what was like the success rate for these escapes?
Now, I will say that the state of West Virginia wasn't real great about keeping records prior to the 1920s. Eventually, the state did step in and say you have to document things like escapes or deaths on the property. So they did start keeping track of that. It is estimated that in total, there were over 500 escapes. And to keep it honest, most of those inmates were never recovered. That was in part due to just simply the terrain of the area. If you can navigate these hills and valleys and coal shafts and rivers, then you pretty much can make your way right across the river, across state lines into Ohio. As well, a lot of the surrounding neighborhood are these gentlemen's friends and families. So often people would hide these inmates or not know that they had broken into the basement. So a lot of the neighbors didn't help out with those escaped inmates either. Now, later on in the years, post-1920s, they really cracked the whip on those escapes. For instance, that greenhouse escape that I was referring to, 3 men had left and all 3 were discovered and returned back to the penitentiary. Another not so wholesome story about returns would have been 1979. It's when off-duty state trooper Philip Kesner was unfortunately shot and murdered out front. So that was just outside of the front doors. 15 inmates escaped from that, only 8 of which were recovered and brought back. Now, 8 of them were returned, 6 of them were trooper slain. So they would have been recovered. So that one was definitely not the greatest record for the escapes, but it goes to show you that it more so the better orchestrated the plan is, usually the better it works out for the escapees.
Do you have a favorite room in the penitentiary? Tell us about that.
I do have a couple of different favorite locations. First and foremost, the first thing that pops into my head was considered contact visitation. And it was where family members and friends could come and visit if you were well behaved enough to be able to have face-to-face visitation with your friends and family. Now, that room itself was often very fearing. It was very intimidating for especially the young children that were coming in. They might not quite understand why Dad's in this big scary castle. All they know is that they just passed 15 murderers in the hallway as their mom clutches them closer. They enter into the room to see their loved one, and above them in the crow's nest is an officer with a 12-gauge shotgun pointed at their face. So a lot of these kids were very intimidated by these visitations. What the inmates had decided to do, a couple of them stepped forward and asked permission to redecorate the room. They wanted to make it more geared towards the children. So about 3 of these gentlemen took their time to redecorate this room. A lot of familiar characters. There's a wizard inside next to a big dragon in a castle. It does feature the Ninja Turtles, although they are the wrong colors. The artist was colorblind, but very skilled artwork nonetheless. It's got a lot of outdoor paintings of mountains and cabins and deers. Very beautiful artwork to see. So still to this day, that artwork remains original, done by the inmates. Nothing has been touched in that room as far as the artwork goes. So that's definitely interesting to see. Now, personally, one of my favorite locations is on the second floor infirmary. Now, that infirmary was not built until 1972, so it is much later in the prison's history. The reason I like it so much is, number one, because most of the medical equipment is original. It is still placed in its original location, and you can truly see the difference between the medical evaluations of 1972 versus the medical field that we deal with today. As well, as far as the paranormal goes, it never lets you down. If you would like to have an experience, you walk onto that second floor. Daytime, nighttime, it does not matter.
I think that's probably my favorite area too.
Yeah, if you ask one of the staff, where's your favorite place to investigate? They will tell you the infirmary.
I like that. And now I'm going to have to ask you, I mean, we know that this place is very haunted. It's top 10, as we mentioned before. Tell us some of your favorite ghost stories.
This is her Super Bowl.
Yes.
Now, the quick answer that I usually give to customers that ask me that same question, what's something you've experienced here? And I don't have enough time to tell you. So usually the quick answer is I've been pushed, poked, prodded more times than I can imagine. I have watched customers be slapped, be pushed up or down the stairs. I've watched scratches form on customers. Customers have watched scratches form on me. I have heard the voice of other employees call me when those other employees were not on the property. I have had other employees call me and ask what I was calling them for me to inform them I am not on the property. We've had tons of pictures and videos of shadow figures, full-bodied figures. We get a lot of disembodied voices and noises consistently. One of the most terrifying adventures I've ever had there was on a simple history day tour, broad daylight. I have a family of 3. It consists of mom, dad, and daughter. Now, the daughter she's about 7 to 8 years old. She has been on this tour so many times that she already knows the next location that we're going. And because it's simply her family on the tour, I basically let her lead it. I said, well, tell me what you want to talk about in this room. And she's wandering around. You can tell she's extremely comfortable in the location. She knows how everything's laid out. She knows the next story that's about to approach. On the very last stop, it is the general population cell block. We are walking through. Her parents are at a distance of probably about 10 to 15 feet behind us. Me and the girl are having our own conversation as mom and dad are clicking a couple pictures in the background. We pass one particular cell and it stops her in her tracks. She looks at me so serious and says, I don't like that man in there. Can we go back to the gift shop? She said it so serious that I did not hesitate, and I said, yes, we can. We left her parents in the cell block and went back to the gift shop. I was done with it. Now, another one that truly sticks out in my head happened I'd say about 2.5 to 3 years ago. It was on a paranormal tour, but it was on what we call a History Mystery Monday. So that is the incorporation of the paranormal locations, but in the comfort of broad daylight. Some people do want to go see the medical ward, but, midnight's just not for them. So we do offer in the summertime a daytime tour of the paranormal locations. Now, this was also a pretty small group, so it's a pretty intimate conversation. We get upstairs, and one of the gentlemen on my tour, he had basically told me, I'm not really into the paranormal. I'm not really into old buildings, but my wife is really into it, and she really wanted to come here. I'm like, well, hey, hopefully you find something you enjoy as well. So we're going through the tour, and you can tell his wife is really into it. She's asking tons of questions, a lot of the times about the paranormal. As I'm telling these stories to the wife, you can kind of tell this man, he's got his arms crossed, he's rolling his eyes, this and that. Towards the end of the tour, we're in the infirmary, as I love it, and we're telling a couple stories, and the gentleman looks at me and says, you seem to be really into this, and that's awesome for you, but I would have to say that I would probably just consider myself a skeptic. Now, partially as a joke, I looked at the gentleman and said, yeah, I've got one rule. Please do not use the S word around the tour guides. It doesn't end well. And he said, what do you mean, sket? And he didn't get the rest of the word out before something slapped him so hard in the side of his head it took him off his feet. Now, that basically ended with the rest of us running back once again to the gift shop. But his wife did get the last dig by saying, and you thought I was the one that was going to be scared. So that was definitely a memorable moment, and now I do not care for the word skeptic anywhere on the property.
What a story. You get what you deserve. That's all I gotta say. Trent, tell us a story that you enjoy when you were working at the penitentiary.
A spooky story?
A spooky story.
I love it. I think the one that I usually talk about most is when I was working in the gift shop. I was simply just restocking t-shirts. There was nobody else. All of the tours had gone out, so I was restocking things. And I was kind of close to a corner, and I turned to pick up a t-shirt and put it on a hanger, and then I turned to put it on the rack, and something was peeking around the corner at me, like 3 feet away from me. That kind of spooked me. So I was like, you know what, I'm done, and took the shirts, threw them under the desk, and just didn't leave behind the desk for the rest of the day. And then I also didn't stock the gift shop for the rest of that week, and I was the only person in the gift shop at that point. It was just me in there for like a month, and so I think my manager had to come in and help me restock because I wasn't going to do it. And then me and Tina have had a few experiences together. One of which being when we were shutting down from a paranormal tour. We felt like that something was following us like the entire time, and then we got close to the gift shop. Tina felt something like touch her pocket, basically, and then we go to turn in to the gift shop through the museum door, which there's 2 doors into the gift shop. There's the big sliding door, and then there's the little museum door that we use for overnights. But I go to turn in, and in the light coming from the big sliding door, there was a shadow man standing there. And I just kind of went, woo, and just rushed in and went, we're done. And she was like, what happened? And I'm like, shadow man's out there. And she's like, oh yeah, we're done.
Now, what's an interesting detail about that story that we didn't think about at the time was that when we went back to the schedule, we looked up the date of that investigation, and it just so happened to be on the anniversary of the murder of one of the inmates there. Infamously known as Red, William Snyder was known to be the leader of the Aryan Brotherhood. He was considered one of the most feared yet respected inmates that was ever housed there.
Wow, what stories? I mean, I've yet to go there, and probably after this podcast interview, I'm gonna have to.
I'll take you there.
We're
don't
going.
worry. We're going.
All right.
Not this month, but
Not this month. We'll just talk a little bit about like what got you into just this interesting history of Marshall County that some people don't really know about.
Well, I grew up in Wheeling. It's about 12 to 15 miles from here. And my parents are also very into history as well. So my dad was consistently taking us to museums and different historical locations. Now, growing up in Wheeling, I kind of ran out of old buildings to learn about. So eventually I did make my way down to Moundsville. I've been here ever since. And I actually moved in less than a block away from the prison itself. My younger sister has been working there for more than 10 years.
Yeah,
Couldn't tell you how much longer. She just is a part of the building now. So when I found out that they were hiring for tour guides, I definitely wanted to jump right into that. I didn't know that I would be as interested in the paranormal as I got into that very quickly in that job. But I will say that the combination of using historical information to validate your paranormal experiences is a lesson that I don't think I would have fully learned had it not been for working at the penitentiary.
I always say that the prison has an effect on the staff members where it there's something that piques your interest. It's just attached to you. Are obsessed. You can't stop. I still love the prison, and I haven't worked there in years. So,
well, tell us, Trent. I mean, I know we're interviewing Tina, but I'd also like to know how you got into this history as well.
So actually very similar to Tina, her younger sister. Tina's my aunt, so she is also my aunt. She was working there for a while. I think whenever I started, she was there for about 6 years. So I started in the event center with Mandy. I wasn't super into the history of it at that point. I was always into history because my grandfather was always taking us to museums and all that. I was always into history. It was always my favorite subject in school. And then I started working at the prison, and I just kind of started to hear stuff like the stories of the prison, and I thought it was really interesting. And then COVID hit, and I obviously couldn't work in the event center anymore because events. I was off for a little bit, and they put me on maintenance, which I am not maintenance worthy. I'm not good at maintenance. But that's kind of when I started to see the building more, because the event center is kind of in a separate building. But I got to see the building more, and then I got to see the places of the stories, and that really hooked me on. And then I started in the gift shop, and that was the end of it there, because I was talking to the tour guides all day. I got to share the excitement of the visitors coming in, because people were always so excited to be there. I loved it. But that's why I got really into the penitentiary's history, and then I started to learn a little bit more about Marshall County history. So whenever I left the penitentiary, I ended up with the Historical Society, and now history people in Marshall County can't get rid of me. So
Yep. But I mean, you've been very helpful in just allowing the Historical Society to have all these great events coming up, as you got a walking tour around Moundsville.
We do.
In a couple weeks.
On West Virginia Day, June 20th.
June 20th.
Tina and I will be doing tours, so hopefully this goes up before then.
So if you'd like to hear us talking this whole time, you're going to love West Virginia Day.
I think I would definitely want to hear more about all the buildings on Jefferson Avenue, and just find out more about Marshall County through Trent and Tina. They definitely know their history. With that concluding, we'd like to thank you, Tina, for joining us for the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me on.
I mean, I've learned quite a lot about the penitentiary, and I hope you, the viewer, learned more about it too. And we'll probably have Tina back on in the future to talk more about the penitentiary and some of the extra stories that she's holding back.
I've always got extra stories.
Hell yes. But if you are interested in becoming a guest for the podcast, please call the Marshall County Historical Society or the Moundsville Marshall County Public Library and ask for Trent or Tanner, and we could set up an interview, and we'll just talk about Marshall County and any type of history or events that you are familiar with in the area. Thank you very much. My name is Tanner Skim.
I'm Trent Dayton.
And this is Marshall County Memoirs. Thank you.